Thank you all for being here today. I just want to start off with a quick roll call, but before we do that, I want to note that unfortunately Roger York has resigned from the council. So we have Charles Menges, who's been appointed by the Board of Zoning Appeals to take his place. So welcome, Charles.
Thank you.
And I think that'll make it easy because we'll start off with you with roll call. So Charles.
Here.
Wayne Creedle. Benny Gates. Philip Hart.
Here.
Yana James. Dave Johannes.
Yep.
Preston Lloyd.
Here.
Eric Mai. Jennifer Mullen. Here. Henry Norrell. Casey Overton. Michelle Parrish. Marisa Peachins. Here. Damian Pitt.
Here.
Councilwoman Robertson. Brian White.
Here.
Charlie Wilson.
Here.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so thank you, everyone, for joining us. Just as a reminder, the Advisory Council is a subcommittee of the city's Planning Commission. We are charged with advising the Planning Commission, the Department of Planning and Development Review, and the consultative team and the zoning ordinance revision. The public will have an opportunity to speak during the public comment period beginning at the meeting. And if you guys remembered our last meeting, if you could please speak up so that those listening online can hear us. And also state your name when you're beginning your comments so that everyone joining us online can also know who's speaking. If you remember, if you don't do that, I will remind you every time you do. So I apologize in advance, but we want to make sure everyone can hear and knows who you're hearing from. So the next item is to approve the March meeting notes. Did everyone have a chance to read those and any questions or comments?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, so at this time we'll open the public comment period. And this is the time for anyone in the public to offer comments on items that are not on the agenda. We will start with those in the room first. If you could just come forward to the podium and announce your name, and this is the time for you to comment.
Can I go first?
Of course you can. I'll say what it's jump. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Gwen Cunningham. I've lived in the city of Richmond for 45 years. This is my husband, Bill Ellis, who lives with me. I'm going to take about 5 minutes of your time. I know it, hopefully I'll go as fast as I can.
To three.
All right, three. Plus applause, right? Okay. I was at the March meeting and there were two discussion topics that you were looking for input on or talking about that didn't seem resolved. And I think I have an example that will kind of help inform you about those 2 points. I'm a homeowner in a neighborhood called Henry Place. I talked earlier about that. It's just west of Carytown between Grove and Cary. It's a very small neighborhood. It's about 90 one-story houses. There's about 4 houses that have a addition on them. Built during the 50s, World War II, that's where all our neighbors when I first moved in. It's transitioning. Let's see. Colonial design. There's a 1-story medical office building that's part of our neighborhood as well. That's right behind my house. So it's an affordable, diverse pedestrian paradise. The Richmond 300 plan talks about that. We're that, just saying. I bought my house because it was a really large sunny backyard for a garden. 30 years ago, I bought it. I checked the zoning, and the zoning was that the building behind me had a maximum of 2-story potential building. It's an RO. I'll have it written somewhere. I'll talk about. And it's the east is behind me. It's where the sun comes up. I knew that could be built to 2 stories at some point, 15-foot setback. It hasn't been yet. I'm very glad for that because I have a beautiful garden that it would cause some issues for. So I keep hearing a lot of planning and zoning folks say that Henry Place, our whole neighborhood, is underbuilt. And I've issues with that in that, the neighborhood evolved as it evolved. People could build up to 3 stories right now. They chose not to. A lot of the older people aged in place, they could put a ramp out front. We have a lot of people with disabilities that are really happy to be able to get in and out of their house and they don't have dangerous stairs. So today I'm going to talk about one property in general. Start with this picture. This is the doctor's office that I'm talking about. That's behind my fence. It's a lovely, they built it in the 60s to match our neighborhood, and it does. It's a very pleasant little building. But I'm going to talk today about the All right, the doctor's office specifically, that's behind my back fence. I have a 100-foot fence. I'm on a pie-shaped lot. This is the current view out my back window, my bedroom window. That's the doctor's office, the back of it. Nice little building. Okay. And before I do anything else, I want you all to just take 2 seconds to envision your home. How tall is your home? How many stories is it? And I want you to double that number of stories, and I want you to envision that built right smack against the back fence of your yard. And just sit with that for a minute, what that would feel like and what that would look like. That's what's being proposed for my backyard. Can open that. Okay, so this is it's to scale what it would look like having a 4-story right up against the fence apartment building it would block absolutely all of my sun. I would get a little bit of sun during the summer months from maybe 1 p.m. to it would change my life dramatically. Other tall buildings in our neighborhood would change other people's lives dramatically. We're a 1-story neighborhood. I know we're going to grow. Nobody in our neighborhood's opposed to growth, but we want incremental growth. I think Mary Ann stressed that point at the subcommittee meeting I was at last week. Incremental growth is something we can palate. Gigantic leaps of growth, we kind of can't. And I think, Phil, last meeting, you talked about a place in your neighborhood that just some big, stark, jarring building appeared that just didn't fit. And that's what I hope to prevent. So very quickly, very quickly, I say.
You can just get 1 more minute.
Okay, 1 more minute. Okay, so I want you to talk about the 2 things from the last meeting. This is where I get back to that. The current zoning of the property behind us is R01. It's 2 stories right now, 25-foot setback. The building there right now has 30. Nice, or that's a front setback. The rear's 10 to 5. This is the proposed of what's going to be there. So my point is it's a bit of upzoning gone too far. It's too much for our neighborhood. All of my neighbors agree that I've spoken with. It's just a bit much. So I propose that there be, instead of just the highest levels right now, or RX4 is what everybody's talking, an MX4, we need an RX2 and 3 and an MX2 and 3. That would allow for some building, it would allow for some shops, whatever, but it would not be the very gigantic jarring size building that's there now. And I did note on the last handout from the last meeting on page 14, they talked about the Charlottesville situation. People in Charlottesville, 20-foot building setback, 40 feet upper story on some buildings. And I wonder why we're creating more packed density than Charlottesville is to have a little breathing room for that. So our neighborhood, it could become a dark walled city with tall 4-foot things and us little people living in the middle of that. Some people in our neighborhood are adding on to their houses. We're cool with that. A couple of mother-in-law suites. So Richmond 300 plan talks about a high quality of life for all, where residents can help shape the growth of Richmond, preserving existing housing units, that everyone belongs, which includes the elderly and the disabled, who enjoy these 1-story properties that don't exist very many places in Richmond. So in the spirit of the Richmond 300 plan, I'm asking that you don't rezone it to destroy our high quality neighborhood and compromise what we currently have. Thank you. If you have any questions.
Any questions? Thank you.
Good, I was clear. Thank you all for your time and listening.
Thank you.
Excellent, Vanna White.
Bill Vanna White.
Is there anyone else in the room that would like to offer comment at this time? You're welcome to come forward. Okay, we'll see if there's anyone online that would like to offer comment. Where did Mary Ann go?
No one has their hand raised.
Okay, going once. Last call for anyone in the audience. All right. We'll close the public comment and thank you for coming forward to offer your thoughts on the Richmond 300 process, the zoning process. So the next item on the agenda is a council recap and a meeting introduction. So Mary Ann Pitts will come forward to give a recap of our past meeting to refresh everyone's memory and introduce the purpose of today's discussion.
Thank you. Mary Ann Pitts, Planning Department. At our last meeting, we went over some of the questions that we had talked about at the previous March meeting of evaluating some of our zoning assumptions, looking at the zoning of the residential streets, the rear transitions between more intensive and less intensive land uses and the zoning of auto-oriented corridors. Today you'll get the map will be shared with you and you'll see how those comments went into the development of that map. So today we're going to begin with a discussion on some of the uses that you received at the last meeting, the use provisions. If any members of the council have extra copies from the millions of working groups we've been to, if you need a copy of those use provisions to look through today, I can bring those to you as well. We'll also have Latoya Thomas from Brick and Story is going to do a brief summary of the survey that was done as a part of that first round of engagement that we did back in February. You all have copies of a 38-slide presentation, but Latoya is going to give a briefer summary of that as well. And we're going to end with the consultant team sharing with us some of the assumptions that they used again for that mapping and introducing the map to you. As we've done in the last meeting, we'll have discussion for most of the meeting, share what the information is, and then come back at the June meeting is when we're probably going to get into a lot of the details of that map. We're going to get a version of to you online that you could look at and provide comments on. We're just working on the best tool to get that to you, hopefully in your email box tomorrow. So that is what happened at the last meeting and our goals for today. I can move on to the.
Yeah, and let's, does anyone have any questions from the advisory council for Mary Ann? Okay, if there's no questions, then we can roll right into your working group update.
So we've been having working group meetings for the past 2 weeks. We've had a high quality place meeting, a inclusive housing meeting, thriving environment, and equitable transportation meeting, each meeting having around 30 members of the community. It's been great conversation. I think what's going to result in is other meetings and smaller meetings, really getting into those uses, getting into the assumptions that we're looking at, and the what's the third thing? And the actual zoning districts themselves. It's been a long 2 weeks with all these meetings. We are working on summarizing that information and going to bring that back to you all in June as well. The High Quality Places Working Group, because this first module has a lot of information that's appropriate for that working group, is going to meet again on June 12th, right after the next Zoning Advisory Council meeting. Our co-lead comes back into town just in time for that. So we'll be meeting on June 12th again to look at some of the information from this first module. And then next Monday, we still have the Diverse Economy Working Group. So if people are interested, just let us know.
Do any council members have any questions for Mary Ann, or for those of you that attended the working groups, any comments or observations you want to share? It would definitely help if it's possible to have the summaries in advance of our June meetings, so folks have some time to read through it and are prepared to ask questions and discuss.
We'll do. Our goal is to get those out to you guys by the end of next week. Once they're all complete and we have a chance to breathe for a second and to get them back to you all.
I would say with the inclusive housing, I felt like we ran out of time.
Yeah.
We had a whole lot more to say, and we tried to be as concise as possible. Every table had was
A lot of the
just
work
didn't have enough time.
It
working.
seems to be a theme of these meetings. There's so much to discuss, and we never have enough time. I've been trying to convince you guys to stay longer.
And we are an additional half an hour this evening.
Oh.
We have added. Sorry, I should have put that on to lead with. The majority of the council supported the additional half an hour. That's right. Yes, Dave.
Yeah, I'll have a general comment. So I've been to 3 of the sessions, and one of the sessions was, sort of a lot of the people from the West End, and that was sort of a faction. And I think the age group was an older age group. The second group I went to was completely opposite, although my table had North Side people and Churchill people primarily, and the age distribution was entirely different, and the difference in diversity was entirely different. It was a totally different group with a totally different perspective. And I thought that was really interesting because so if I had been, just somebody wondering what the public is thinking about, I would have had 2 completely diverse responses on that. And then the third was a little bit of a mix of the second, but more sliding towards a younger group that was there. and a group that was a little more concerned about getting housing into the city.
That's
Hey, folks, announce
Interesting.
your name.
sorry, Charlie Wilson. The second group was inclusive housing, and the third group was
Third group was thriving environment.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to understand the response bias there.
It's high quality places.
All right, any other questions for Mary Ann? Okay, thank you. So at this time, we're going to move into the survey results, and our consultant, Latoya Thomas with Brick and Story, will review those with us. Welcome, Latoya.
Great, thank you, everyone. I'm going to share screen. Give
If
me
you
one
can't hear
second.
me, just hold on just a second.
You cannot hear me. Okay.
We're meeting sometimes with difficulty.
We can hear you, Latoya.
You can hear me. Okay.
Yes,
Just the room cannot.
the room can't. Sounds like.
I'll keep going through screen sharing in the meantime while we get audio text sorted.
Do they know it's on their end? I think so.
Will you say something?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Great.
yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Fantastic. No, thank you. And you can see my screen, I assume.
No.
We can.
Yes.
Oh, is it hers?
Yeah.
Is that it? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Latoya Thomas with Brick and Story. As was mentioned earlier, a number of you came to the open house series a few weeks ago, and as a part of that, the end of that open house, many of the questions that were actually part of the boards of the open house series were moved into an online survey platform to allow folks who maybe didn't attend the open houses or who may have had more feedback to give to provide their input. It's taken us quite some time to go through all of this data. I am only presenting a snippet of the data tonight. As was mentioned, the advisory committee has probably almost 40-page packet of various charts and graphs that I know you are all sitting with. And so I just wanted to go through some of the high-level points tonight so that you can see what we've heard so far. I'm going to touch on general demographics. I'm going to touch on some of the feedback we heard specifically around the residential districts, and then feedback that we heard around recommended future zoning. The other thing that I'll close with, it's not part of these slides, but I do want to just give folks a brief update about some of the other engagement that's coming down the pike, just so that folks know what's coming out over the next couple of weeks, particularly around some of our targeted engagement, to make sure that we're also targeting other demographics, particularly demographics that you will not see reflected in this survey. So I just wanted to give that preamble before I get started. So let me dive in here. So very quickly, I want to open up with a demographic summary. So this slide shows you that we had, again, we adapted the open house boards into an online survey module on SurveyMonkey. We had a little over 1,100 surveys submitted. Not every single person responded to every question, so caveat that. But we did have over 1,100 responses from the open house itself. So the physical in-person open houses that people attended, we had about 300 comments come across all 3 open houses, and those were the sticky notes that people provided comments on. And we had more than 75 neighborhoods represented. So across the city, a range of folks that we heard from, but also definitely folks that we didn't hear from. And again, that's where we'll talk about kind of other things that are happening over the next couple of weeks around engagement. You can see here top responding neighborhoods. Gold Star goes to Bellevue with probably the biggest turnout in terms of just responses, but still very strong representation from many other neighborhoods in the city as well. Again, this is just a sampling, just to give you an idea. Some other highlights for you demographic-wise. Not surprisingly, mostly residents responded to the survey, just under 75%. We did have percentages of folks who worked in Richmond, as well as business owners and a small student population that responded. Race, ethnicity, I would say also not surprising given what we've seen in terms of turnout with the open house, which is why we're leveraging other engagement activities to target some other demographic groups, largely white respondents, a slight uptick in Black respondents for the survey. So again, that's what we're thinking about with the other engagements that are coming out over the next few weeks. In terms of age, most representation from that 25 to 44 demographic, followed by 44 to 64, and then 65 up. Also not necessarily surprising in terms of ownership versus renter versus other housing tenure status. The vast majority of respondents were homeowners. You will see as we go through the data, the trends that we've looked for as we go through this data. We've looked for trends in housing tenure. We've looked for trends against age demographics, age brackets, and we've also looked for trends across neighborhoods. So I'm going to go through the residential districts and the questions that were posed and what we heard and where we saw trends. So first question from residential districts: to allow for gentle increases in density, do you support allowing duplexes in residential detached districts? Of the 795 respondents that answered this question, obviously you can see overwhelming, well, not even overwhelming, it's not quite half and half, a little more on the yes for support over no, but still very close between yes, wanting to support versus not wanting to support. As we dive into that data a bit more, if we break it down by age, you start to see different trends with respect to younger versus older demographics. So that 25 to 44 tends overwhelmingly to support duplexes compared to 65 and up, which is trending more towards opposing. That 45 to 64 bracket is right in the middle. In terms of support for duplexes by neighborhood, and these are folks self-identifying what neighborhoods they're attached to, give you some comparisons here. Bellevue, Museum District, the Fan, Churchill, strong rate of response in terms of supporting duplexes. That's compared to West Hampton, Mary Mumford, that were more strongly opposed to supporting duplexes. The next question: are you comfortable with the breakdown of the residential attached districts, max 2 units, 6 units, and 12 units in a building, or should there be some other type of breakdown? So in terms of the first part of that question, are you comfortable? More than half of the respondents to this question, 159 respondents, indicated yes, they were comfortable with the breakdown. To the follow-on question, should there be some other kind of breakdown? We did have respondents who indicated recommendations around unit minimums and unit maximums if they thought that there should be something different. We are showing kind of the breakdown here by housing tenure. So in terms of the minimum suggested units, generally saw responses between 2 and 8 as the minimum. Most respondents here were owners, but you can also see for the renters who responded, they tend to go with slightly higher minimums, 3, 4, and 6 units. For maximum units, ranging from 1 all the way up to 24. Again, mostly owners who responded to the survey, but where you start to see the trends is for the renters who did respond. You've got large numbers of respondents at 2, at 6, renters who are responding in both of those categories, but then also responding much higher up at 18 and 24 as a maximum. How do you feel about allowing for 4 stories in the RAC district? And if you don't support it, should it be lower or higher? So 4 stories in the RAC district, the responses here were you're okay with it versus you think it could be higher, you think it could be lower. So we had a number of respondents who indicated that it could be lower. So you can kind of see the results there in terms of specific numbers of stories that were recommended. 3 stories was the most commonly suggested height. Our team internally who did the analysis noted that this preference was especially strong among young homeowners and Mary Mumford in Bellevue. Going into, and for folks who have the packets with you, I'm jumping all the way towards the latter part of your packet. There are other sections in the middle that talk to commercial, mixed use, industrial zones and park zones. I'm just going through quickly some of the highlights here. Evaluating interest for future zoning options in neighborhoods. So I know this chart's a lot, so let me talk through this. Which zoning districts would you like to see in the neighborhood in the future? So this chart is basically showing you how people responded in terms of their preferences for a residential district based on the district that they currently reside in. So based on, for example, if they live in a residential attached high district, which is the first bar on the left that you see, the respondents there were largely overwhelmingly residential cottage and residential attached high. General trends that you see here in this chart. Most people prefer more of their current zoning categories when they think about the future of how their respective neighborhood develops. So people are trending towards what they already know. Residents of detached residential neighborhoods tend to prefer low attached residential options over medium or high attached. Residents of attached low residential neighborhoods are more interested in more attached housing. And residents of cottage neighborhoods are least interested in residential attached housing. What residential zoning districts would you like to see in the neighborhood in the future? Again, also based on your current neighborhood, this is looking at neighborhoods where we had 40 to 50 respondents from the neighborhoods. Top residential districts of interest. So where you see the trends that are coming out here, Ginter Park, residential attached medium had the most preference. Oregon Hill, overwhelming preference for residential attached low. Sherwood Park, residential cottage, and then residential attached medium. And then Church Hill, residential attached medium, followed by residential attached low. Again, these are kind of the top two that you're seeing in those respective neighborhoods. For neighborhoods where we had over 50 respondents from the neighborhood, I'm looking at the fan. Strong preferences there for residential attached medium. Museum District, a bit of a tie between residential attached low and residential attached medium. Mary Munford, residential detached low at the highest response rate. Same for West Hampton, residential detached low. And then Bellevue, residential cottage at the top ranking, followed by residential detached low. Interestingly, after that, then you've got residential detached high, followed by residential attached low in Bellevue as the next two trends. So that's really the top four trends reflected there. Which mixed use, commercial, and industrial zoning districts would you like to see in the neighborhood in the future? So something to note of all of the categories that people had to choose from, no neighborhood that responded at least indicated support for industrial mixed use IX6. So you do not see that category on this chart, but you do see industrial mixed use IX8 shown. Again, this is a stacked bar graph, so where you're seeing responses are by neighborhood and indicating where the preferences are, just to highlight a few of these. Going to my left, looking at Scott's Addition, where you've got a number of responses that are interested in mixed use 13 or MX13, which is in the gray. And then kind of even distribution for industrial mixed use, IX8, mixed use MX8, and mixed use MX6. Bellevue, strong preference there, again, with the votes that we received, residential mixed use 4, RX4. You'll see also the trends around mixed use RX4, which is the yellow, at Oregon Hill, Museum District, the Fan, and Churchill. In the last two neighborhoods, the Fan, you also see interest in residential mixed use RX6. Same thing for Churchill as well. And then you see a couple of smatterings of mixed use, which is the orange or MX6 throughout the Fan, Churchill, and then a couple of other neighborhoods in terms of 1 or 2 response rates there. Which future zoning districts would you like to see in the neighborhood in the future? So this first chart looks at percentage of respondents who express interest in zoning districts by type based on housing tenure. In terms of ownership, you'll see vast majority of respondents who were owners indicated an interest in residential detached. That is compared to probably the bigger extreme, which is interested in mixed use designations, where you will see more renters expressing an interest there. And then same thing with certainly a gap around interested in mixed use commercial or industrial between renters and homeowners. So again, trends that you see there, homeowners are more likely, really 2 times more likely than renters to want residential detached zoning. Renters is significantly more likely than homeowners to want residential attached, and renters are most likely to want mixed use commercial or industrial zoning. And then in terms of age and interest in mixed use commercial or industrial zoning, I would say this is not necessarily surprising given kind of what we see with the changing fabric of some of Richmond's neighborhoods, particularly those that might have these uses, trending 25 to 44 year old age bracket that tends to be more interested in those zoning categories. I believe this is my last slide. Interest in zoning district types based on housing by age. So interest in age by residential detached zoning districts, 25 to 44-year-olds for our respondents express interest in residential detached. A larger percentage of that age bracket indicated interest in residential attached zoning districts. In terms of where we've also seen trends, looking at the right, 25 to 44-year-olds tend to favor new zoning for all categories, but they tend to support residential attached and 4- and 6-story mixed use the most, compared to seniors 65 and up who express lower support for mixed use commercial and industrial zoning. And as we saw earlier, the younger demographic around 24, in that mid-20 bracket tended to have more preferences towards those commercial, industrial, and mixed use zoning categories. So I believe that is my last slide here. The last things that I do want to point out, just for some very quick engagement updates to talk about where we're going as we move into this first start of modules that are happening this summer. Some of you have heard about our community ambassador program that we've been standing up. I believe we had about 13 applicants for the ambassador program, and I think nearly all of them are following through with moving through the ambassador program with us. The ambassadors are working with us to arrange targeted roundtables throughout the city of Richmond, particularly to target some of our harder to reach and under-engaged demographics. We have the first 2 ambassador-led roundtables scheduled, actually 1 in 2 weeks. That will be a youth roundtable in Southside, and then another one that will be scheduled in June. And we're working to get several others scheduled with our ambassadors over the course of the summer. So through that, we're working to reach more Black residents, more young residents, more Spanish-speaking households, more renters. We are also working to organize some ambassadors some roundtables outside of our ambassador series, including with the YIMBY organization, Home VA, and I know we have one with Virginia Community Voice coming up in a few weeks as well. Lastly, we also have a number of pop-ups that will be happening to support the open house series. We've got a number of those that are scheduled. I know there's one coming up for the Multicultural Festival and some others that we're working to organize in Southside. So we'll be, as Code Studio is starting to produce a lot of the materials specifically for the modules, we'll be adapting that content to roll out on the ground into some of these other events to support what we're hearing in the open houses and also get some of those other voices in the mix. And that is what I have for you this evening.
Great, thank you, LaToya. This is Elizabeth. I realize I forgot to announce my own name. Does anyone from the council have any questions for LaToya? Charles?
Yeah, this is Charlie Minges. In the demographic summary connection to Richmond, it shows, over 73% are residents. The other categories, business owner, student, worker, work for 16.3%. Are those not residents? work in Richmond and they don't live here? So that
We
means-
had, yeah, I believe we had some, and we'll go back into the raw data. We had some people who did respond, who attended, who worked in the city of Richmond, but did not necessarily live in Richmond.
Okay, so the only residents are the 73 who responded to the survey, on 73.8% figure.
That is, so that's based on what we can tell from how people responded. Yes.
Right.
This is Maritza Peachin. Were people able to select more than one, or did they have to choose only one in this question?
I believe they had to select one, but I need to go back into the SurveyMonkey settings to verify that. But I'm almost certain they had to select one option.
I didn't look at the survey. Could you tell me what they used for their criteria to make these decisions with their photographs and images of each one of these districts on every question?
That's Dave Johanna. Name.
Oh, and I'm Dave Johanna.
So the open house, sure, the open house board content was aligned with the survey question. So it was basically an adaptation of what you would have done if you were physically in person with the same board material.
Okay.
So all, including all of the graphic material.
This is Wayne Cradle. At the beginning, when we began to meet, we actually did a map of suggested organizations to reach out to in order to increase engagement. Do you know if that was integrated into the study?
Sorry, when you say into the study, do you mean the survey or do you mean in the engagement process?
Right, in the process.
Yes, yes, that list has been integrated because we're in communication with a number of those organizations now.
Okay. Within that number, were there organizations within that list that were not responding, or were there any issues engaging with those?
So we would need to pull up the list and actually go through kind of one by one with you to let you know if there's some that we've not heard from. There's certainly some groups that we've definitely been in regular communication with. There's others that we've been maybe not directly in communication with that specific organization, but have been working through other organizations to share information with them, such as individual churches, for example. So I'm happy to offline kind of go through that list with you if there are some specific ones you have concerns about.
Sure, absolutely. My last question is, will you all do another study in order to compare to this one after you all navigate everything with the ambassadors?
And so again, just to clarify the question, when you say another study, do you mean a survey like what was done for the open houses?
Yes.
I think we'd want to talk internally about that. I can say we will not do the survey in this way. This survey it took a lot of a lift to do the analysis because of how this survey was designed. So we would want to do some tweaks to do another survey like this so that we can also just analyze the data more efficiently next time. But I think there will be opportunities throughout the process, particularly with the modules that are rolling out, for us to have questionnaires, particularly because we'll be doing things like pop-ups and having other opportunities for people to provide bites of input, particularly if they can't or don't come to an open house.
Okay, thank you so much.
No, I was gonna say, Latoya, this is Elizabeth Greenfield. To follow up on Wayne's question about engagement in the survey from those that we made that initial list from when we first started meeting. If there are folks on that list or organizations that you've not been able to make contact with, maybe if you could let Mary Ann know, she could share it with you. And if someone on the council has a relationship with that group, we can maybe start a dialogue so that they're involved in future engagement opportunities.
Absolutely.
One more question. When I think about everybody responding to this, people responding to the information that they received, and that information is to answer questions about their preferences. This is Dave Johannes again, sorry about that. And I assume they're being asked to answer the question regarding their preferences, but they're not being asked to respond to what I believe is a crisis and a need for this city to provide housing and to develop to be a more financially stable environment. and to support the people in this city. When we do these surveys, are we somehow explaining that we have a concern about, we have to have a solution. We're solution oriented as a group of people. That solution had been started with the master plan. The master plan described all these things we need to do for the city, had a huge response of people, and now we're trying to promote that issue regarding what are we going to do about the housing crisis? What are we going to do about providing equitable housing for the city? What are we going to do about our pollution? And so when we're doing these surveys, my question is, people aren't being asked to solve that problem. Or I assume they're not being asked to solve that problem. They're just being asked to say what their preference is for their personal environment.
Well, I want to be clear about the intent of this particular survey, because I hear what you're saying, but I think what you're saying is getting at a different kind of survey. This particular survey is really a replica of the open house process itself and the very, very specific questions that were asked as part of that open house and as part of the set of boards that were prepared for the open house to start to narrow down specific zoning preferences. So look at this survey, look at this not as a traditional, what I would call, not as a traditional policy guidance survey. Look at this survey as a virtual online extension of what happened in the 3 open houses in, I believe it was February or March that we did the open houses. I think to get to what you're trying to get to, I think a lot of the points that you raised, number one, they are underlying policy concerns and policy principles that would frankly be articulated as part of the overall code refresh process, not necessarily just a survey. But I think it's also a different type of survey and a different type of, or different set of questions that would be put forward to start to ask questions so that people can indicate preferences, but also understand how those preferences are going into bigger policy decisions.
Yeah, Charlie Wilson, I think building off of that, the open house experience in person, I thought was really excellent, and staff did a great job being present and walking people through, various things like quick pro and con analysis of, oh, are you concerned about this? Well, if you're concerned about this, then here's a pro to that, here's a con to that. Like you can in real time form an opinion, which to the layperson is a great opportunity because at home, I mean, I'm the same way. I'm sitting at home, on the couch, filling out a survey about whatever, and I'm not doing so with the benefit of someone who knows more than me about this, telling me, just basic context about what I'm answering. So if we are to rely upon this survey that you've given us here going forward, might be easier said than done, but bifurcating it from like, this is the type of response we got in person, and then this is the responses we got online, that might reveal a little bit of a gap, maybe. I don't know. It's hard to say, but I'd be curious about that. Overall, it was a well-executed survey, though, I think.
And certainly as part of the, as everyone knows, we are writing engagement reports as part of this. So this particular survey took us several weeks to analyze because of the number of respondents and how the data came in. We do have the information specifically from the open houses as well. So we're more than happy to kind of go back and also share with the Zach a bit of a comparison, just in case there were any major trend differences between the two.
Yeah, just if something sticks out, I'm not going to be a stickler about it. I would be curious.
Yeah.
And I'll take this.
We're getting past the agenda time, so Dave, I'll let you have the last question, and then we've got to move on
Okay,
to
this
next
is the
one.
question. It's a comment. 30 years ago, when we were trying to get people to move into cities in the country, the housing, whatever, National Housing Association, whatever it is, they had these surveys, and they go, where do you want to live? And they'd show these beautiful pictures of nice little suburban locations. And then they'd show pictures of, blighted cities. You know, would you like to live in a blighted city, or would you like to live in a nice residential district in the suburbs? And then one day somebody came out with another survey. Instead of doing a blighted district, they chose this, charming little historic district. And all of a sudden the response changed. Yeah, we'd love to live there, but not in a city, but that wasn't a city. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're getting the right message out. I would like to see us try and get a message out that responds to the social issues also in terms of, that as a comment. That's all.
Yeah.
I would say your hands again.
Thank you, Latoya. Unless you have any last final comments, I'm gonna move us on to the discussion on draft use provisions, which is Colin. I think you're gonna lead that.
Yes, I am. I am. I just share my screen. This one. Everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah. Yes.
What company?
With Code Studio. I'm sorry, Colin. I can't. Colin, can you say your last name so I don't butcher it?
Yeah, Colin Scoff from Coach Studio.
Thank you.
And just wanted to give everybody a little bit of a recap of the use material that we presented at the end of the last ZAC meeting. Renee is not here today. He's taking a few days off and enjoying a break. So we are going to continue to regulate use. There is going to be a greater emphasis on form and built outcomes as part of the new ordinance, but use will continue to be regulated and will be an important piece of each of the zoning districts themselves. We are moving towards what we call a consolidated use table or use matrix as a way to kind of regulate uses moving forward. Right now, you just list individual uses as part of each zoning district. And so we're trying to make kind of a more user-friendly approach where we list all of the districts along the top, and then the uses are listed on the side of the table. And so if you want to figure out what uses are allowed in your zoning district, for example, if you were in RDA, you just go down your column and it would tell you what uses are allowed by right, which would be P. And then we have a P with a star or an asterisk, which means that that use is allowed by right, but there are additional use standards that apply to that use. Or we have a C, which means that use is allowed, but you would have to get a conditional use permit for that use. So we have also made an attempt to consolidate uses that are similar that we call kind of use categories. So you'll see for something like group living, instead of listing a whole bunch of uses that might be considered group living, we've consolidated a number of uses into what we're calling general group living. So you'll see that term show up several times throughout the table, general civic, for example, and general daycare. And that just means there are a number of uses within that row that make up that specific use that we're calling kind of a general use. So we have the definitions of uses. Like I suggested, here's an example of the group living use category. And then within that is the general group living, and that groups a number of different uses together. And each of these general use categories list kind of typical examples. So in this particular case, general group living includes boarding house, dormitory, fraternity or sorority house, monastery, convent, and SROs, and sober living as well. So all of those uses would be regulated within that one row on the use table. What that allows us to do is fundamentally get a shorter set of uses when we're using this table. And our goal really here is to be as streamlined and as efficient as possible with as many different uses that are similar as possible. The system does allow us to pull out other uses that aren't associated with that general use category. So if you look at group living, for example, we pulled out co-housing and senior care because those are treated differently in the use table. So in general, for example, RAB, general group living, you have to get a conditional use permit if you want to do any of those uses I mentioned. But for co-housing, that is allowed by right, and senior care is allowed by right as well. So we have the use definitions and then the use standards. So as I mentioned before, if you have a star or an asterisk after a letter, it means additional use standards apply for that specific use. And there is a cross-reference here that would send you to that particular use standard. So if you were looking at, special needs housing or emergency housing, for example, you would click on that cross-reference or go to that cross-reference, and it would have the standards associated with that use. So it gives us the opportunity to list additional standards beyond what would typically apply under the kind of the base zoning districts. And so these are just some of the questions that we gave you last time to think about. We've kind of expanded on some of them a little bit, but some things we're really interested in hearing about from the group. Does this new approach to regulating uses make sense? Do you have any specific questions or concerns? Are we missing anything? Is anything grouped with something that it shouldn't be? Is the approach to identifying specific uses that require, P star or C star intuitive to you guys? Is it understandable? You'll see in the use table that we are regulating things based on sizes, for example, or number of people for kind of specific uses. Is that working? Does that make sense? Did we miss pulling anything out, any individual uses out? Do some seem unnecessary or redundant? Should we be consolidating more if we can? Really be interested in your thoughts. In terms of mixing uses, should small commercial uses be allowed by right within the RA and RD districts? If so, should they be on the ground floor only, or can they extend up into upper stories? Can they be freestanding, or should they only be allowed on the corner lots? Is the range of allowed uses in the INS district too broad or not broad enough? We kind of touched on this, I think, at the last SAC meeting. Is there a problem with allowing residential uses in the INS district? Is there a need for a very small light industrial use, makerspace use? Could be proposed in the RX and MX districts, or only in the industrial mixed use districts. Is the range of allowed uses within IX too broad, or is it not broad enough? Should it be weighted more towards industrial uses or residential uses? And then kind of finally, what types of problem uses concern you? Where, if anywhere, should they be allowed or not allowed? Some examples might include nightclubs, the sale of alcohol, cannabis, tobacco or vape stores, convenience stores, check cashing, payday loans. So when it comes to auto-oriented uses, they can kind of be unfriendly to pedestrians, but most people still need a car. So where should auto-oriented uses be allowed? Things like vehicle repair, gas stations, drive-throughs, big box stores. Do you kind of agree with the way it's shown currently in the use table? If not, why not? Most of these uses are only allowed in the IX and CD districts and IL. Should they be allowed in a greater variety of uses? And then I think kind of finally, what other concerns do you have about use? Are we missing anything? Do you foresee any problems with the uses as proposed? So with that, I would love to hear from folks.
Yeah, could you maybe go back to the first, just we can start with the first slide of questions, just so it's up, and Maritza, you have a question, and then we'll turn it to President.
Maritza Peachin, are we meant to answer all of these right now, or is this for teeing up for next month?
I think he wants our thoughts on these now, which is a lot. That's why I asked him to go back to the first page. So, Colin, I think this is a lot.
Yeah, they're very similar to the set that we ended with last at our last meeting. They've just been embellished a little bit. And so if you guys want to stick more closely to the questions that we asked previously, that's fine too.
Okay, so that wasn't my real question. So my real question is, I have found that in the city, conditional use permits are not really generally applied for. People do special use permits when they need it because it follows the same exact process. And so is there a plan to change the conditional use permit process in this zoning ordinance update?
Well, there's definitely going to be less of them on the use table. We're definitely heading that direction. In terms of specifically changing how you get a conditional use process, a permit, I'm
Yes.
not sure. I guess TBD, but I guess we're open to hearing anything that you think is not working with the current process.
This is Elizabeth Greenfield. If, Bruce, am I understanding correctly? Are you asking if they're referring to the CUP as what we use today as the SUP? Yeah.
So there is a technical distinction. So the Richmond Charter, which is only able to be modified by the General Assembly, gives the city of Richmond unique powers to approve basically a complete modification and waiver of anything else that's in the zoning ordinance. That's a really unique thing to us. And so that everybody uses that tool. It's a great tool. It's very powerful. And so if the timeline is the same, to go to council and say, can I have this additional use that's shown on your use table? Or at the same time, you can get a complete modification of the setbacks, you can change any design requirements, complete flexibility. Everybody's going to choose the SUP because it's so much more versatile. And so there's going to have to be procedurally, and I think this is your point, Maritza, you're going to have to incentivize folks to hit the easy button, hit the quick CUP, make it fast, make it something that doesn't require as much review. It's got to be expedited. Otherwise, everyone's just going to do the SUP every time. It's a better option.
And so, I mean, that might be moving more into like a different section of the zoning ordinance. So we don't have to go over that in detail. I just wanted to see if that was on the table.
Philip, hold just a second. I'm going to get precedent.
And I apologize, I was not part of the more thorough discussion. So if this was said last time, forgive me, but I'm going to first sort of, and sorry, Preston Lloyd, answer the first question. The use categories make sense. I think they do. And I like the elegance of trying to compress that as just a way to try to structure this. But at the same time, I'm going to offer some constructive feedback specific to the group living and then the special needs housing categories. And the context for this is that in circa 2020, the Department of Planning and Development review at City Council's request did a complete overhaul of these use regulations in our ordinance. And it reflected a recognition that when it comes to permanent supportive housing and when it comes to shelter uses, one of the most significant barriers to being able to provide the off-ramp to people who are in housing crisis, creating additional units of that kind of housing, is the fact that our regulations were very burdensome. You couldn't put them practically anywhere in the city unless you got an SUP. And so council said, that's not a good situation. We need emergency housing. We especially need permanent supportive housing. We need group living. And so we're going to put it everywhere. We're going to put it in any residential district and basically anything that's not industrial, with some nuances to that. And so when I look at this draft use table, this is not only a reversal of all of that effort, it actually goes further back than what the status quo was before those 2020 amendments. And so from a policy standpoint, I just don't see the alignment between that proposal and the Richmond 300 plan and talking about that segment of our emergency housing policy and how we try to create more supply, because from a regulatory standpoint, I think it's going to be a pretty big sea change.
So, Preston, are you talking specifically about group living uses versus what are we calling it?
I'm speaking to group living, emergency housing, permanent supportive housing, and I'm also not 100% sure that I see the distinction between. I guess I need to spend more time with the transitional housing definition because I see you called that out as a specific kind of use. But it's the other two, the emergency housing, the permanent supportive housing, that was the subject of the 2020 zoning text amendments that council adopted.
I think it's the transitional housing also.
Okay, it is. Thank you.
So we should be adding those into the industrial districts
No, they should be in every residential category where they're currently not even allowed by a CUP, based on the table as I'm reading it.
Okay. Maybe we have a version control in terms of the tables. So we'll look at that, Preston. Our intent is to allow it in every district.
I think the table that you've included in the presentation is an old version of the table.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I'm printing out extra copies of the use provisions. If you have them from last time, that would be awesome, but I'm getting those right now.
Okay, so the special needs housing has been added, but group living has not. So that's, thank you. You're right. Those are not consistent, but I think that the comment is still valid as to the group living.
And while Marianne's getting additional handouts, Dave, just a moment, we're gonna get to Phillips.
Yeah, pull apart. Preston, thank you for that description of the difference between special use permits and conditional use permits. But looking at this allow use table, I get the T, I get the C, but dash says it's not allowed. But what Preston just described is that due to this city charter provision and due to what I've observed to be common practice in zoning matters in the city, people use the special use permit, which allows the city to rewrite all the rules that pertain to a specific situation. So that may be news to the consultants that the city has that, but what it renders in terms of it renders these dashes meaningless, because with a special use permit, anything can be done in any of these categories. So am I right or wrong about that?
Per the charter, that's the current law. You're correct.
So maybe it was really Maritz's question, but is the city planning on changing that, such as to give up this special use permit and to go only to a conditional use permit as a means to deviate?
To be clear, that would have to be done by the General Assembly.
So I think the method, Maritza Peach, the method would be to make the CUP process shorter and clearer so that people are incented to use that rather than spend a long time. And like, council and planning commission could be like, hey, there's a CUP process. It's easy. You should be doing that instead of like, spending however long and much money getting.
Well, that begs the question of what is the conditional use permit standard and how is it different from the special use permit standard? Because the special use permit standard does have a few toe holes and things like, not too much congestion, safety, things like that. What are the conditional use permit processes and standards going to be, and how are they different from the special use permit?
So I know Dave has a question, and I'm not bypassing him, but I see the land use attorney's raising their hands, so.
Yeah, so unless Preston wants to take it. So with the conditions, Jennifer Mullen, with the conditional use permit, typically in other localities, if it says C, there are criteria for your conditional use. So you need to provide that criteria, and it depends on what the use is. So it's not open-ended that you might think it's a traffic congestion issue. It's you need to provide X, Y, and Z, and that is your conditional use, and that's what you're presenting. So that streamlines it, and it's narrowly tailored to your conditional use.
But it still has to go to council,
Yes.
which is,
And the other nuance too, although it's similar to the SCP, but council can impose conditions. And so the thought is the conditional uses are typically uses that may be perfectly valid for a particular zoning district classification, but council wants the ability to impose any conditions with that use before it gives the green light.
Yeah.
And so that again, you would hope, to Jennifer's point, and I certainly agree, that if there's clear criteria in the ordinance as to what those conditions would be expected to be, what are the issues that need to be addressed by the applicant to justify the request? Otherwise, it's to Philip's point, I think you made a valid observation that it's just going to look like the SCP process.
Yeah, and just to beat the dead horse, these dashes again really don't mean what your chart says, because your chart says the use is not allowed. It's not allowed as a matter of right, but it can be, these uses can be in all of these categories, in all of these areas.
Oh, I do have something. to
Really
add.
quick.
Yes.
Yeah, in the course, Charlie Wilson, in the course of getting an SUP, a part of it is earning staff support ideally and getting recommendation of approval at planning commission. I feel like after this exercise is completed and we have a new zoning ordinance, the bar is going to be a lot higher, or it should be a lot. I don't know if it will be, but you would think it'd be a lot higher to ask for a SUP. So I think that's kind of why we're doing this, frankly. So.
Okay, thanks for your patience. Okay, Dave, and then Dave.
Yeah, Damien Pitt. In response to the first two questions, I do think that the sort of overall structure makes sense and that this is all quite intuitive. One, I have two kind of specific observations. One is with respect to daycares that, you know, see that tiny daycares up to 12 people, which I guess is implying like in-home type of daycares is allowed in all residential uses, but general daycares are only conditional in the detached districts. I think that general daycares should be allowed in the detached districts as well. If we're going to allow school, I don't know why we would allow schools up to 1 acre as a permitted use, but not allow daycares as a permitted use in the same neighborhoods. Likewise, we're allowing churches in those districts, so I think it would be appropriate to allow daycares as well. Particularly given, you know, the whole point of this exercise is that, you know, we're acknowledging that people are flocking to this city. We're hoping to, you know, retain young families that in past generations would have, you know, moved to the counties as soon as they had kids. And the you know, affordability of daycares is a big challenge there. The lack of daycares, as you know, I think others here can speak to from experience. The other point I'll just make quickly is with this, something that came up in the Thriving Environment meeting was around utilities and how the sort of two categories seem to sort of overlap in weird ways. I don't want to get into details, but I just want to flag the fact that points have been made around utilities and how that needs to be sort of thought through a little bit more, specifically as it relates to energy storage, which is, I think, is going to be a booming land use that is not counted here at all.
Yes, Dave, thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to follow along the same sort of line. First two categories, I agree, no problem. Area sizes and as categories, I think we need to go a little more descriptive than that. 15,000 square feet for, I don't know if there's anything that said 15,000 square feet or 12 people living in 15,000 square feet is, you know, 1,000 plus square feet per person. But also when we're thinking of institutional uses in 15,000 square feet or 15,000 square feet for public uses in neighborhoods, that's a different story, because if we're going into a residential district and we have a 15,000 square foot facility that houses community meetings of 300 or 350 people or 400 people, that might be oversized for the district. And if we're building those sorts of events in these districts where we want higher density housing or housing, we end up building a lot of parking lots to support these services. So we need to be careful about that. I think we need to look very carefully at the total square footage and then also the occupant load that goes with that square footage. Daycare, exact total agreement and support. Group living is another discussion. Where is that one? I think we need to look at being able to have group living in different areas and wider ranges of housing. Going on down the list, small commercial uses in RA or RD. In our discussions, I guess yesterday afternoon, we discussed some opportunities for residential or maybe at least RC districts where it's more dense. Have opportunities for maybe 1,500 square foot commercial uses or little commercial spaces. Because the RAC, I believe, is what the 25-foot wide yards. So when you start adding up all those 25-foot yards, you have an area that's almost as dense as, let's say, the FAN. Same thing with RD in terms of having commercial available to it. Then another one was greenhouses or nurseries. We should be able to have small greenhouses or nurseries in every neighborhood, residential neighborhood. We should be able to be, you know, have plant services, and people in the neighborhood should be able to go walk over and pick up some house garden needs. Indoor growing systems, urban gardens, same sort of thing, they could be permitted. And then going into the minor utilities, I think one of the things, and I guess we can't do this conditionally, so we need to handle this through our ordinance, is protecting the environment, meaning the physical environment. If we're building a utility abutment, you know, typically they've been maybe not so great for the neighborhood. So having a concrete box should not be permitted. They should have to, we need to control what goes into all the residential neighborhoods where we have utility fixtures and boxes, or, you know, I don't think, so, you know, we still have leftover wire management stuff all over the city that hasn't been cleaned up. This one in Jackson Ward, we have them down in the bottom. We just cleaned one out in Lower Robinson. And automobile vehicle services, that's really important. We should be able to have some sort of small scale automobile services in our residential areas. People shouldn't have to drive over to a commercial district to have a tire fixed or something. I work across the street from Fritz's garage, and you know, it's delightful to drop my car off and not have to worry about it. And I can walk wherever I need to walk to and pick it up in the afternoon.
It's an all staff and patron. It's an all staff and patron. We will be conducting the fire inspection test this evening. If you hear the alarm going off, do not be alarmed. It is contractors testing the system.
System testing.
Thank you.
Oh, system testing. Okay. The other thing is small farmers markets, where you're not allowing them in RDD or RDC. That's something that I think we need to look at. Outdoor dining. I know that during COVID, we had a lot of outdoor dining elements going up in different areas. You know, the Hill Cafe, we put up an outdoor dining area where neighbors would have been, you know, intensely opposed to it years prior, but you know, it's no problem. It wasn't a problem. We might want to reconsider that. And I think that's all I have on my list so far.
Thank you, Dave. We'll get Brian and then we'll go back to Damien.
This is Brian White. One of the recommendations for exclusions that I would have that you asked about would be to eliminate nightclubs as a permitted use, certainly in all residential and mixed use areas, and maybe beyond that to require SUP for opening one day, or they put an enormous strain on city resources in the neighborhood around them. And I think it would be very helpful to have the city be able to attach conditions to businesses like that in areas where they're also residents.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of disagree with one specific point that David made, but make it into a broader point that, like, when you talk about, you know, vehicle sales and service, for example, I agree. I would love to and currently able to drop off my car at a place that's walkable to my residential neighborhood, but it's still in a small neighborhood scale commercial district, as is the specific place you mentioned, right? So we're going to have, and Richmond 300 calls for neighborhood scale commercial districts that would allow for some of these types of things we're talking about that are still in what's more broadly like residential neighborhood, but not on residential zone properties. So I think we need to continue to make that distinction to say, you know, just because we want something that we want our residential districts to be, neighborhoods to be walkable, that means that doesn't necessarily mean that every single residential zone property needs to have a variety of non-residential uses that's allowed. And all this is going to be a lot easier when you see the map.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if general education above 1 acre should be like not only allowed in institutional. I guess, I don't know. I guess I have to see the exact regulations for institutional, because then it would cause like all kind of institutions, basically like all schools, to get institutional zoning. And it could, I mean, it could impact quality of life for people, because there are several schools in Richmond that are in residential districts, public and private. Like, that's something that we want, is people to be able to walk to their schools. And there are several, like, there's a lot of, we have to think about how churches are transitioning and how like, you know, a church use can be a very good use for a school, for a private school that wants to move in, can be a really good facility because a lot of them have like kind of they have buildings attached that often were daycares before. So like if that church, I can think of a church right now that's on the market, that church is in the middle of a residential neighborhood and someone wanted to do a school there, like they wouldn't be allowed at all. And that actually might be a good draw. So I don't know.
Would they be grandfathered in regards to the size of the lot? Yeah, I'm curious to know too.
It would be
Yeah,
definitely now.
But
Yeah.
right.
that actually is the point that I was going to make with Preston. I think we need to also understand what are the regulations for legal non-conforming use, meaning a use that was lawfully established prior to the adoption of the code that we're talking about. Because what this is going to do is basically any use that's above the minimum size that now requires a CUP will not be able to expand. They're not going to be able to get a building permit unless they go back to council and get a CUP expanded. And that obviously comes with a certain burden and cost associated with it that we just need to be cognizant of.
Yeah.
I'll just piggyback. I think with a lot of those types of uses, they're very good for the neighborhoods. But you get people that move in that maybe move in because of the church or the school. And then if it starts to expand, I mean, it just.
Then they can't, and then they leave because they don't have room, which, I mean, I don't know.
And could you also talk about the public open space above a half of an acre not being allowed anywhere except for open space?
Yeah, this is Elizabeth Greenfield. I was noting that there's a number of neighborhoods, I can think of in mind that have like little pocket parks in the neighborhood. I don't know the acreage off the top of my head, but they're owned and maintained by the city, and under this, that just like they'd be allowed.
Well, I guess maybe those would then be zoned open space. So then they would be allowed.
But this says public open space above a half an acre is not allowed. So there's a zoning district that's for public open space that
Is the city gonna actively rezone open space as it?
In the mapping, yeah.
Let's pause for a second, because Colin was trying to, our consultant was trying to chime in. So Colin, did you have some responses or questions back? We're firing off a lot at you.
Well, I think the sizes are definitely, we're interested in hearing your perspective on the sizes. I think what we're trying to do is, so for general education and public open space, as once that use gets to a certain size, we're trying to push it to a more appropriate district like INS or open space, respectively. And so that's where that break is, I guess, is something we need to figure out. But with the intent that only smaller, for example, public open spaces would stay zoned residential, for example, and once you went past that half acre, we would be rezoning you to open space. And you'll see some of this in the map that you're going to get sometime soon.
Thank you. Preston Lloyd. So I'm going to refer to one of the questions that was asked, which is the allowance of residential uses as a by right use within institutional. And I'll start my response to that by saying I fully agree from a policy position. However, I've also been a land use attorney in Richmond long enough to know how much that's a lightning rod for a lot of communities and neighborhoods within the city. And so ultimately, I want this code to be one that we can get approved. And I think that's one that's going to set us back in terms of winning the hearts and minds of certain neighborhoods because of that long history of proposing residential proposals on institutionally exempt properties. So I think that's one that we may just need to think a little bit about strategically. Jennifer, I don't know if you have comments or thoughts, put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, it has been allowed in every residential district forever. So I think that it's a sea change to then make it be institutional, knowing what comes with institutional zoning.
Not in other departments.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking Preston, this is Marita. Preston, so you're saying the first table where it says residential uses and the fact that this is permitted under institutional, will cause problems. Like if an institution owns 2 acres of land and it's zoned institution.
In other words, as of today,
Yeah.
if you own property that is zoned institutional, you cannot build a residential use on that without going and getting an SCP or rezoning approved by council. This would change that. It would mean across the board throughout the city. Now, if you own institutional, you can put residential on. And it's by right. You don't have to go to the neighborhood. They have nothing to say about it.
As long as
My concern is that that's gonna perhaps burn some goodwill with certain neighborhoods.
I mean, but on the flip side, like we have affordability
We do.
challenge.
Which is why I started from the standpoint of saying, I think it's a great idea. But
Yeah.
politically, I worry about what that does to the ultimate objective of getting this approved.
But I guess, this is Jennifer, I guess my only, bring it around, there's only a few institutionally zoned properties now that are actual institutions. Most of them are all under the NER district. And they don't have that
Institutional zoning.
prohibition. So I think maybe it's an educational standpoint that you're still carrying all those things that are still allowed now if you're going to rezone it to institutional, which then has an additional requirement of master plan that has to be updated every time you do something.
I'm wondering if the purpose of this, Charlie Wilson, sorry. I'm wondering if the purpose of this is intended to, a common refrain, depends on the mapping, but right now, if we're going to take churches that exist and zone them institutional, the next step to that is, okay, what do we know about churches in today's world? Fortunately, congregations are shrinking. A way to, fulfill their mission in a lot of ways is to provide housing of some variety or repurpose their buildings for housing if the congregation has been fully dissolved. Saying multifamily is permitted in institutional zoning districts adds some immediacy to that being an option. I'm just wondering, I feel like that could be a net positive personally, but hashtag depends on the mapping because
David, just quickly, if you're talking about a scenario in which an institution ceases to be an institution and wants to use its land to become residences, then it should get a rezoning and become residential.
Yeah, but that's like a speculative 9-month process that, adds some heartburn to it, be the technical word.
And it's expensive.
Yeah.
Great, so Colin has moved us to the slide on mixing of usage.
Anybody have any thoughts on any of these questions? We kind of touched on the first two, I think. How do folks feel about the whole kind of light industrial maker space question, allowing that in some of, the RX or MX districts? I think right now it's only really allowed in the industrial mixed use districts as proposed.
Oh, Elizabeth, yeah, it's still apart. I'll respond to that, give you my advice. I think that if I'm reading page 3.6 correctly, you can have retail, office, general medical, food and beverage, and as a matter of right in RA, and then with conditional use permits in RD. Personally, I think that these uses ought to be along those major streets and not within single family neighborhoods. It's sort of similar to the comments I made earlier about duplexes and where I think they work and where I don't think they work. Related to this, and I want to bring this up, is this, and I don't know that we've talked about it, but is live work. And I think people ought to be able to conduct their businesses from their homes, have no problem with that. But when I read back on page 23, the definition of live, work, and description of residential district, this can be general retail, general office, general medical, food and beverage. I was surprised to see that because that's like retail. That's like people coming, parking their cars, going in and having meals in residential houses. I would dial that way back. I mean, if it's going to fuel retail with cars and traffic, that should not be allowed in real work. If you want to have a doctor's office or a CPA, not doctor's office, CPA design person or something like that, sure. So that's my feedback on those somewhat related topics.
I-
Other comments?
I agree that kind of in keeping with trying to have mixed uses more along kind of priority transit corridors and these different districts, it makes sense to have the food beverage like not within the middle of a neighborhood. Seems kind of random. And those uses probably would rather be on main streets. It would support like more density of commercial uses along our corridors that we're trying to invest our transit dollars into.
Yeah, I'm sticking with the RDC should be a little more flexible just because it's a higher density district. If you have a 25-foot lot, you've got a house there and you've got maybe 2 studios in the back or ADUs in the back. And that's the level of density of the neighborhood. That's a neighborhood that should be more geared towards an urban district and a walkable district and not one where people have to walk over to a corridor. The RDA is different because it's much broader and it'd be much harder even just to support probably a small little unit, commercial unit. And RDB, I could go either way, so that's not as essential. But I do think the RDC is where that transition should occur, where we get small commercial.
And this is Jennifer Mullen, just on those same lines. Did you have any thought on, you've got 1,500 and then above 1,500? 1,500 is pretty small. Is there sort of a middle category? Because I think there's a lot of residential neighborhoods that have pretty neat walkable restaurant, retail, service sections of the neighborhood that I think is pretty charming for Richmond, and we should encourage that are definitely bigger than 1,500, but they're not 20,000 square feet. So you might just want to think about if there's a middle ground so that you could have something a little larger that's more akin to what we have in different neighborhoods that I think a lot of residents like, but they're not on major mixed use streets that would allow for that.
Okay.
But they are largely on corners, which is one of those questions.
Not necessarily. Lafayette's all in the middle of the block and Bellevue's all in the middle of the block.
So I was just going to explain for scale. Cuba is like a little over 1,500 square feet, just to give people perspective in there.
Yeah, that's something. Along the same lines as Jennifer, this is Casey. I personally am in support of small commercial uses by right in RA and probably RD as well. I mean, the sizes of and the forms of the buildings won't allow for but so much busyness, I don't think. I mean, if you have a smaller place, you're not going to have 15 people in there at once. The space just won't allow for it. So I don't see like the congestion and being much of a concern. And at the same time, I'm recognizing how we're moving into more a gig economy. We're moving into more job insecurity for a lot of people. So for somebody to be able to sell plates or whatever it is out of their house and not be restricted in doing so, that will open up economic opportunity for people that I think will really be necessary in the coming years as things are growing increasingly insecure. So I think we could potentially face larger problems if commercial isn't allowed to expand and flex in the ways that will allow for what people need as we see restrictions and constrictions in the job market and changes there that are going to probably get worse. So I think the flexibility will ultimately serve us better than being fearful of the congestion or other outcomes that I don't think should be that dramatic, even if they're not on major streets or corners.
I think we would be interested in exploring options that would allow people to do more activity in their homes to the extent that we can, and like figuring out what the spectrum is for that. But whether we call that home-based business or home occupations, to what extent, what is our comfort level in allowing, a small hairdressers, for example, where you might have a couple of hairdresser chairs and you might even have a couple of employees, for example. Would be really interested in hearing from folks on that specific issue if you have any thoughts.
This is Maritza. So I think, small general office, personal service, even like hairdresser, like you're saying, would be okay in those. The one where I kind of get hung up, just me personally, like in Northside, like I can just imagine someone then like opening a little bakery in like their back in their like garage or something. And like, it'd be like on the alley, like right behind my house. So then I have like all these people like that. I mean, little like Sub Rosa type bakeries can be in really small spaces, but then I would have all these people like coming to my alley to like buy bread every day, which is like maybe not what I was thinking, because then they like leave trash. I mean, that's Maritza, the like personal property owner, not like Maritza, the developer. Like I do understand there's tensions here, but that's where I kind of get like that use. I'm like, I guess it's a C.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be permitted by right.
It's a legitimate question to raise, particularly as we're seeing people turn, back alley garages and sheds into like an accessory unit. It could very easily turn into some sort of occupation. So that would not be the intended use.
I'm wondering, Charlie Wilson, I'm wondering if like food prep or things like say you make baguettes and you're selling them to a restaurant or something, and it doesn't actually. I'm wondering if there's a way you could thread the needle to still allow for some reasonable food stuff to happen. Anyway, just a thought.
I will say that, once you get into food, there are, health department issues that you would have to address. They're going to require specific things once you start dealing with food preparation and food sales.
This is Damien. Another point on live work, with it being, conditional in these residential areas. I think we have to be aware of some of the kind of class coding of all this. Like the people who live in the equivalent of RDA, RDB, RDC. There's thousands of people working from home in those types of districts in Richmond already. Yeah. And these are, white collar professionals working from their office. And if we are going to, and there's never going to be any way to possibly like regulate that, right? So it's sort of assumed that if you're the type of person who works in your computer in your den, then that's okay. But if you're the type of person who has a different type of job from your house that's more kind of public facing and that's kind of like this exterior presence, so that's not okay. I think that there's some sort of class issues associated with that make me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm a little more supportive of the idea of having the alleys activated. I have no problems with alleys being activated. I have no problems with people living in alleys. When I think about building things and people worrying about people tearing down houses because there's no room to put anything, we got plenty of room. We got plenty of alleys that we can fill up with people without deteriorating the fabric of the city in many districts. It's a really low impact architecturally and visually for the people who live in their neighborhoods to increase the use of our alleys. And having a bunch of people walking through the alley and going to a bakery is, not so bad.
So this is also about have to agree and slightly disagree. I mean, I'm all for activating alleys, having more eyes on the alley, but we have to think of the infrastructure and whether or not the alleys can handle. It's one thing to have an ADU there and have someone living there, but have people coming back and forth on a routine basis for commercial activity. I don't know that a lot of our alleys are set up for that type of.
I'm just practically thinking, like I use my alley to park my car in a garage, and like Like I could picture the person behind me like opening like the next hot bagel place in Richmond and then having like, 40 people in line. Like, and you could do that. I think the point has been made. I don't need to like belabor it, but I'm just sort of like, that's a lot of people all of a sudden behind my house.
Bagels and burritos on Saturday.
We would,
But I love making bagels. I don't
we
suffer.
would definitely have standards in place that would specify how many visitors or how many customers you could have at any one moment or within any one day. Yes, you would have to enforce that, but we can come up with metrics. Like you can only have 4 customers a day or 8 customers a day. I do want to say that our residential neighborhoods are changing. If you think about how many deliveries now might be associated with a residential neighborhood in terms of Amazon deliveries or FedEx deliveries or UPS deliveries, which in theory is unregulated, right? You can have as many deliveries as you want show up at your house. I think anybody's going to tell you you can't right now.
Go ahead.
I was going to jump off mixing pieces. Jennifer, you're consistent with this page?
No, I headed entertainment recreation. I'm gonna be the
All right.
park police today.
I'm very interested to hear yours. I'll go first. So thank you. I'm going to go back to residential quickly, and I'm going to flag an issue, and I haven't yet arrived at how I necessarily want to deal with it, but I think many of us think about what's the appropriate density based on sort of a general understanding that the city is largely urbanized. And so it's very easy to sort of think about the transect, if you will, from like where we want density to go with the nodes, just like our master plan identifies, and then it gets more, you have less density as you move further out from the node. And yet there are portions of the city, not very many, but they exist, prominently in South Side, the 958, where you may have 10 acres of undeveloped land, green space. And that's not going to be zoned it's not going to be in the mixed use category. And it's also not going to be at the high end of the residential. It's going to be zoned consistent with low density housing because that's what the outer reaches of the city are as you approach the Chesterfield line. And so if we're trying to create new housing, you're never going to fit, right? Because if you have 10 acres, you're likely going to be thinking about more than 13 units. And it doesn't work there. And it's because 13 units on 10 acres is a very low density. And yet you have to subdivide the property and only make it single family housing. And so again, you have got a bias. We're moving back into the bias towards suburbanized single family lots rather than higher density housing. And so I said at the outset, I don't know what the solution is here, but in that fact pattern, I don't feel like what we have here really reflects the fact that there may be opportunities to create density in like a clustered way that makes sense, but I don't know how to get there. So Maritza, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Preston. This is Maritza. And perhaps that's kind of solved through the mapping exercise where you kind of look at the larger vacant parcels and you're like, well, maybe it's in an RBA district or whatever, what we would naturally do is RBA, so maybe it'd be RBD. It really depend on like the context of where that parcel is.
Agreed. And I think the mapping, I mean, it's been said by Charlie a couple of times, it's going to be very important. And I definitely agree with that. But I'm wondering if there's a way to sort of capture that clustering concept in such a way that if you've got a lot of land, you get a little bit of extra flexibility to create that density, as long as you're offsetting it with appropriate amenities, open space, et cetera. And there's the infrastructure to support it.
Jennifer, do you have a comment?
Well, I agree with that thought. I think that's important. And also the multi-unit, I think we should also just think more about on 3 to 6 units, that just where, if it looked at this part versus the other one, but just thinking about if you could have 2 units or duplex and an ADU, then why you wouldn't allow for a 3 to 6 unit building that probably is smaller than those things combined. That doesn't seem like it makes that much sense. So I think we should think about that piece. But again, I was originally just looking at the entertainment and recreation and how it's not really needed anywhere. So just from a healthy living standpoint, I would like to suggest that indoor recreation, I don't know why it wouldn't be permitted in institutional or in a industrial area. If you think about the bigger places like, like a CoRe or the park or other recreational places, they're often in industrial zoned locations. So I think that should be permitted. And outdoor recreation, just based on the description, I'm a little confused. Maybe you can help me on what the thought process there on not allowing it anywhere other than CG. And then to consider the indoor recreation or indoor entertainment also in the industrial, and then the outdoor entertainment. I think that we need to think about that in lots of other districts, just given the success that Richmond has had with outdoor entertainment facilities and what that has brought to the city in terms of things for us all to do, but economic development generation and really tying that all together. So I would like for those pieces to be revisited.
I'm glad you mentioned that. This is Preston to chime in on that excellent point. Two things that I've seen that are restricted in our current ordinance. One, if you want to add outdoor music to an existing restaurant, so Scott's Edition, you want to do something cool in a neighborhood where, that vibrancy, it's hard to do, except that I think the department got it right when they specifically toyed with the TOD1 and the B7 districts in Scott's Edition to make that a little easier. But in other districts, it's harder. That's observation one. Observation two, to your point, we currently have the Downtown Civic and Cultural District, which is meant to authorize those entertainment uses that activate the riverfront. It's specific to like a geographic region, and it's wide open. You get to do a lot of stuff that you can do elsewhere in the city because of that desire to activate that. And so at the amphitheater that's about to open, it's about to be eliminated as by right use under this ordinance. It wouldn't be authorized because it would require, I think it just actually straight up wouldn't be authorized as a permitted use. So I don't know how you approach that downtown, but I think that, I think it's very well said.
Hold on, Phil, just a second. Colin, is this your last page, or do you have, because I know that you have another presentation that we want to get to, so I want to make sure we're hitting on all your questions as best we can in the time that we have. Problem uses, okay. How many more after problem uses?
That's it.
Okay, all right, Philip.
Back to mixed use, and I want to echo the excellent comments of our public's commenter earlier today. She made the point that I've made before, which is that we need a category that is less than RX4, which 4 means 4 stories. We need a category of RX2 or 3. It can be used when we're transitioning from residential attached and detached to mixed use. Going from if you listen to her explanation of her neighborhood and what the impact of a 4-story building will be, and perhaps the damage it will be in terms of depriving light and air and all that kind of stuff, it's too stark a transition. If we had an RX3 or RX2 or something, that would be a great tool to use to buffer some of the impact of this on our residential neighborhoods.
Charlie Wilson, we actually talked about that specifically in my subcommittee for high quality places. It was the context I was talking about where nodes bleed into residential neighborhoods. Our table, at least, they were a little skittish at first, but when we started talking about inclined plane abutting residential districts, it wasn't the actual total height they were as concerned about. It was instead how it kind of if it can slope down like 4 stories at the front on like the commercial street, and then as it slopes back to the residential areas across the alley, might be 2 or 3, give or take. So maybe that's something that isn't articulated in this chart, but could be articulated when you get to the actual district.
And I've seen that work in occasions. It's
a typical compromise that we're used in rezoning cases. But that wouldn't work if you only had a narrow sliver of land. You need space in order to
Well, it
get
would work if
your slope.
if the ordinance is written in a way that says, if you're getting within 0 feet of your property line, you get 2 stories, and then from that point, you get an inclined plane. If that inclined plane, geometry, I look crazy, the geometry of that doesn't get you an extra story, then you don't get the extra story, because like you said, you don't have the room, you don't have the run to get the rise. So could be something to consider, if the immediate height abutting an alley is the sensitivity, which it sounds like was most of the sensitivity.
Yeah, I don't think there are that many locations for that in terms of the city. I think some of the previous notes I looked at had districts that dropped down before they came to the residential. A couple of areas that are more at risk, though, I think West Gray Street, it has a couple of places where the residential butts right up against the higher commercial areas. So those might be places where I was also at that same meeting. I spoke to somebody else about the inclined plane. And part of that discussion was within, let's say, 20 feet of the alley, you get 3 stories, and then you start the inclined plane. One of the primary concerns she had, she walks out her back garden and looks up, and she doesn't want to see the building directly in her, frontage. But, she likes to look up at the sky. Sky's a big issue. So hopefully there are some opportunities to deal with that same item, that inclined plane.
Jennifer, would you second?
Oh, sure. So, that's already in slide 11. I looked ahead, it talks about MX3 and reducing some heights. That's all.
Thanks. Sorry, Jennifer.
No, I was just gonna, and I hadn't gotten this slide ahead, but if every residential district, you can have a 3-story building. I guess if you could have a 3-story house back there, I'm just curious, and maybe that was part of the discussion. Is it the fact that you could have some other use that is problematic? Because that doesn't track with the height.
Yeah, I think the 4-story thing didn't sound that intimidating to the couple of people that I was talking to. They just weren't intimidated by the 4-story. They're intimidated by tall buildings.
Okay.
So by having the first step and going up to 4 stories or something would be very, very easy. Yeah, I'm not thrilled with the MX3. Is that what the new
No,
condition is?
MX4 is.
From 4 to 3.
lowest height.
Yeah. 3 is pretty shallow.
Yeah, Charlie Wilson, to Jennifer's point, at my table as well, that the argument wasn't lost on them. Like, if someone could do a 3-story house back there, but all of a sudden we're only saying 2 stories of commercial is appropriate, what's the actual difference? And that was something that they wrestled with, and ultimately they were like, oh, we're not actually scared of the height. And these are 2 people, right? So I'm not letting them speak for the entire city, but in this case, our conversation was productive, and the inclined plane made them feel better about an overall taller building potentially going there that happens to be commercial for multifamily.
Preston has a comment, and then I want to give a few minutes to additional conversation on problem uses, and then we're gonna have to move on to Paul's next presentation.
And I was gonna go to the problem uses question, and I was gonna ask, since we have the benefit of the longest serving city council member at the table this evening, what are the uses that you and your colleagues feel like you need a little bit of extra scrutiny on in the city? And there are a couple examples there.
Ellen Robertson, yeah, thanks for the correction.
The uses Preston brings.
It's difficult because I'm listening to all of the conversation and what we heard from the survey and what we prefer. It's somewhat interesting, and found as if there's more opportunity. I think a lot of it is the type of use that we have the greatest challenge with. Is, if it's a multifamily housing development that has several stores, depending on the neighborhood, in most cases, folks don't want things to go, even in neighborhoods where we have high number of stories of buildings. people seems to have gotten to a place that the over the level of density is what creates the additional problems with how much more density we allow. And so controlling density by zoning to prevent a level of density because of the restrictions that zoning sets the standard for control. But in areas where we already have, I mean, downtown's classic example is, I mean, when we talk about the towers that we have that may be all corporate America right now, or was corporate America, but the opportunity for looking at more buildings that stores, 15 stores and above, where do you bring that kind of density? And it appears that that creates a lot of problems. But then I think it's the type of business or use that it is that folk are just not comfortable with in certain zones. And that's the reason why, I just said, let's just stick with special use permits almost, because when we start weighing all of the this or that, don't put this in the alley, but you put this in the alley, don't do this here, but you can do this or that, in this piece of people's preferences that, and I think that's the reason why the city is such a huge special use city, because, people's preferences and people want to make sure that their preferences are always honored. So I haven't had a lot to say at this table because it's very important to me to hear the dynamics of the conversation that is being had, and recognize the complexity of what's the challenges of zoning and how to integrate different kinds of uses that makes it be the city that we want it to be. One of the things that I said previously, and I think that's important, if we, and I know I have not gotten a satisfactory response to this. But the city of Richmond wants to be a city that is not too high of a dense city, and people feel very good about living in the city. But then on the other hand, we are a landlocked city, and we are choking ourselves tremendously as it relates to economic growth and development of opportunities because we want to be a small city. And the trending is becoming more of it feels more like it wants to become that little smaller city with less density. But that also means that we do not have diversity of income levels and opportunities for that we move more to a upper income city that really doesn't provide an opportunity for anything else. And that's not what I think a healthy city should be about. I think urban cities are urban cities, so they are urban cities for a purpose. And so, I don't know why I volunteered to serve on this. It's complicated. It's very complicated. So I don't know if I answered anything, but to say to us that if you want your real estate taxes to not be $1.20 per hundred value, and you want that to be less, and you want Richmond to be a more affordable city to live in, this zoning work that we're doing right now has got to have an underlying driving principle that says economic stability requires so much opportunity for growth and development. Otherwise, we need to just marry the fact that we're going to become a nice little city with a few moderate income and mostly high income people. And that doesn't.
Can you come to the economic development working group meeting on Monday?
That was well said. Yeah, very well said. Thank you. There's a reason Preston put you on the spot.
Oh, okay.
Do you have any other comments on problem uses or anything else on the slides? Colin, are you and your team capturing this? Because
Yes, we are. We
I
are.
think that's in every meeting. If you think of something afterwards, we can get comments to Mary Ann that she can share with the consultants. But we still have about 10 minutes left on this agenda item. Any other problem uses?
This is Wayne Cradle. I just have a clarifying question. Have we, and it could just be me, have we defined what problem uses are? I see the categories, but are these problems based upon crime? Is it problem based upon hindering plan here? How do we define problem?
I think some of it, probably could be crime. Some of it's just perception or historical problems that have arisen. Maybe it's from alcohol sales and, so I think it's really your opinion, but I'm sure there's some fact base there based on these uses and maybe some problems they've caused in existing neighborhoods and areas.
Gotcha.
This is Brian White. What is the definition of an adult entertainment? Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about strip joints, which I think is what we're talking about there, I'm not sure that should be in a mixed use area. It doesn't seem like, you want that next door to your bakery and, tile shop.
That might be a good conditional thing.
Yeah, that would be my argument.
Yeah.
I believe for that specific use, we carried over to the extent that we could what you do today. There are, legal implications on where adult uses are and not allowed, I think. So we just want to make sure we're addressing those appropriately.
So we got another thing, trouble uses, NIMBYism, not in my backyard kinds of things, concentrated poverty. Those are things that we really need to make sure we're addressing as a part of the zoning. And that means that there has to be opportunities for those kind of things. I think a lot of the reason why, we've talked about having entertainment zones in the city, wherever that's appropriate to have. But we have a very, very growing young population in the city of Richmond. And we've got a lot of new babies that are being born in the city of Richmond. That, and by the time we get out of this zoning thing and get it to the council, they're going to be 50. They'll at least be graduating from high school or college. And that's a population, and not just that population, but that population is growing tremendously in the city. And either we're going to provide places where my college kids can go and have a great time, and enjoy entertainment, or I'm going to move to a different location. It's just as important as where the church is, and just as important as to where the other essential kinds of things, schools are and churches, just as important as to where my kids and my grandkids today, where can they go in Richmond that I feel really good about them going out and having a great time. And it's not Chock-a-block.
Well, this is Elizabeth. I think it's evident from the survey that there is generational divide for what the younger generation wants to see in their city and what they're comfortable with. And while that doesn't discredit those that are of a different age set and have a different opinion, I do think we need to, Richmond 300 looks forward, and the zoning ordinance supports that document looking forward. And to Councilwoman Robinson's point, we need to think about what the next generation who's going to be living and working here prefers just as much as existing, residents who are of a older age group. But, and the younger folks, they don't mind living next to a brewery or a fast bakery.
Until they have their first, they have 10-year-old kids.
Yeah.
Then they care.
But this is Brian White. I think the survey didn't speak to it, but I would suspect that a big part of that generational divide is that those of us over a certain age, we benefited from being able to buy a home 30 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever, at a price that was achievable. And you've got people in their 20s now who are not sure how they're ever going to own a home. And they are the ones pushing for us to make this more flexible. And it's those of us who have enjoyed the privilege of being able to get in on home ownership earlier who might be reluctant to embrace that density. And I think we need to acknowledge that reality.
Yes,
Yeah, it's Charlie Mingus. A question, because I'm coming in here late, as you know. Has it already been decided by this group that single-family housing, one detached home per lot, is no longer on the table?
No, and this is Elizabeth Greenfield. There's some misunderstanding floating around that this document, which is draft form, as you know, has not been finalized, gone to the planning commission or council, but this document is going to eliminate single-family zoning, and that is absolutely false. Single-family zoning will still be allowed. What we have talked about in a group setting in this group is whether or not, in addition to the single-family home that today only allows single-family detached, could you put a duplex or perhaps a triplex, whereas before it was just one single-family detached per lot.
Yeah,
So
but
you're
that would be eliminating single-family detached homes as it's currently
still
zoned.
allowing
I'm sorry?
You're still allowed to build a single family home. It's just you're allowed to build more.
Yeah, I know you're allowed to, but zoning is not just a matter of allowance. It's also what you can't do there. And what you're saying is it would not permit. And
That would prohibit.
has this council, have they already gotten to the point that that's kind of water on the bridge?
No, I think we've probably spent 3 or 4 meetings on that topic, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if there's consensus amongst this advisory committee. In fact, I think meeting discussion 3, I said we need to leave it in the document that we're going to allow triplexes and duplexes in single family areas, and that's something I think the public's going to have to decide. But
it's not the public, it's the city council that's going to decide.
well, the public's going to have a chance to weigh in on this too. So yes, you're correct, ultimately city council, but we need to let the public weigh in.
And just to make sure what I'm saying is put into context, I absolutely think that there needs to be more effort for additional housing in the city. There are different ways to get that, as well as you mentioned, abject poverty we have in certain areas of the city. We need to finally grapple with that. It's not going to, can't fix it overnight or anything. Those are all important things that city and city government need to be committed to. You also need to understand that in other cities that have done upzoning, the record on whether it increases affordable housing is very spotty. It has not universally, by any means, resulted in more affordable housing, more housing. There may be targeted ways to create or to result in greater housing, but it's not necessarily through the zoning, and through the densification of certain districts. There may be some zoning ways under the zoning ordinance where you can improve the chances of that sort of thing. But pure densification, which is, this upzoning thing has been around for a while. It's part of the new urbanism philosophy that started back in the 80s or whenever. But the record is by no means clear that it's going to result in more housing, and we do need more housing. I have a son who grew up here, now lives in New York City, and he's dying to get back to Richmond. And I'd like him to be able to find something that doesn't cost $1 million+ where he and his wife can move. So I think a lot of us, even though we may live in a single family neighborhood, I think people understand that there's more than to just living there. You know, there needs to be an effort to provide housing to the extent you can for people in all walks of life, and all income levels. But in any event, just want to make that clear, because it's not a question of being against single-family detached districts, which only permit single-family detached house, or being in favor of densifying those things. There's a lot more involved.
Yeah.
Charlie, you get the last word.
Yes.
Oh,
Also,
Charlie
Charlie.
Robinson does.
Okay. Yeah, Charlie Wilson. Yeah, welcome. Yeah, just a small retort. I think it's pretty evident that our kind of ancient zoning philosophy has resulted, and I can provide a number of examples in my work alone, where less housing was built because of our current zoning. So if you're saying, oh, there's anecdotal examples of like, hey, the city passed a new zoning district, and then what? Like, that's still in the works, right? We can't control. Zoning doesn't guarantee stuff gets built. It just is in my mind, like the guardrails between which things can get built. And those guardrails right now are like way thinner than they need to be to meet the goals of Richmond 300.
I told you first. So my question is logistics, as to the timeline that we're working on. What do we want to have done by a certain, we're gonna have benchmarks. And then I would like to have that sent again to us just to see where we are. And also, I want to look closely at that as to the method by which we want to proceed with getting it approved. I am very concerned that if we get this, and I'm sure that we won't, but if we don't get this in some type of segments or some type of approval as we go through some of this process, dropping it on the planning commission after months and months of work to get there, or to city council, we will have to decide that we're going to spend another 3 or 4 months going through segments of it to really approve. Or council is going to have to go through another 6 months of segments to get it approved. And so when we send the timeline, I'd like for us to look at that very critically as to how we get it to an approved stage.
Marianne, could you briefly touch on the timeline piece, and then, as Councilwoman Robinson said, get that sent out through email?
Sure.
And it may be, don't throw something at me, wise that there's some work sessions, maybe with the planning commission, council, so that, to the councilwoman's point, they're not getting a large document all at once. They've had some piecemeal opportunities to weigh in.
Great. So this is module 1, which consists of the draft districts, draft uses, and the draft map. It's currently being rolled out right now. We're going to the community with that at the end of June.
Do you have children?
Do I have children? I have 2 children.
You do? Do you speak?
Oh my gosh, Ms. Robertson, so module, I feel like I'm yelling at you. I don't. My children are angels. Module 1 is the materials that you've received to date, the use provisions, the draft districts, and the draft map that you're going to be receiving now. We're going to the community at the end of June to share a lot of that information with the community at that time. Module 2 will come next, which is the development standards and more citywide regulations that we're looking at. Ideally, that'll be the following 3 months. In July and August, I know these dates from doing these working group presentations is when we're going to be having the working group. So I believe October, so Latoya's still on, is when we're going to be going to the before October. I think September, going to the community on module 2, and then module 3, the administrative provisions, are going to come after that. The goal is to have this before Planning Commission and Council early next year. I've even said to Kevin, like, wow, this feels really fast, but I think we're getting the big thing was to get these maps out And it's, so people have something more easily to react to. So if things need to slow down as the mapping conversation occurs, but the maps are coming right now. So, and we can send you this. The consultants have the presentation where they have the dates probably better than I just described them.
If you could resend that, that would be great. And Dave, brief, because we're behind. Okay, all right, thank you. I appreciate that. Colin, did you want to touch on your last piece on the draft training map? And I know we're a little bit behind, but be mindful you've got 15 minutes.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for the use conversation. It was very insightful and a good conversation. So we've been working in the background. You've seen the sample neighborhood zoning maps that we put together. We've been working in the background to put together a complete citywide proposed zoning map. That is our primary goal there is to implement the land use plan from Richmond 300. That is our starting point. And so just some kind of very relevant based on today's conversation, we just wanted to highlight some kind of key changes that we've made to the zoning district since our last meeting. We have reduced the height of MX4 down to MX3, so moving that down from a 4-story district to a 3-story district. And then we've reduced the maximum height a couple of districts. So our RAA has been reduced from 40 feet to 35 feet. And then the maximum height of RAC has been reduced from 55 feet to 50 feet in the name of compatibility with existing development. So still work in progress. I 100% want to state that we will be working on transition requirements that you will see soon. So the idea of requiring step backs for abutting zoning districts that have different height limits is something that we are currently working on. And so here it is in its full glory, citywide zoning map. It's very sensitive. Next to the Richmond 300 land use plan. So as Marianne alluded to, we're in the process of figuring out the best way to get this map to you. It is a very big map. It is very intimidating, I would suggest, in terms of like, where do you start? How do you start to look at it? Probably neighborhood by neighborhood, or what neighborhoods you're interested in, I would suggest looking at first. We need to figure out, as I said, the best way to share this with you. We were trying to think through a kind of interactive online version. There might be some issues with that legally, so we just need to figure that out. Worst case scenario is you'll get a PDF of this that you can comment on digitally. So just wanted to kind of give you a sense of our general approach that we took when kind of translating the Richmond 300 land use plan into this new citywide zoning map. So it was kind of a stepwise process for us, and it took a fair amount of work. And I just want to reiterate that, you know, this is a draft. It's a preliminary draft that primarily we've put together. We have a little bit back and forth with the folks at the city. So this is, you know, a moving target, and we fully anticipate there will be kind of a fair amount of changes associated with this map, but we kind of have to start somewhere. So the first step that we took is we kind of took the existing zoning districts and converted them to the closest new zoning district. So for example, you know, if you were zoned R1 today, we kind of translated you to RDA. Or if you were zoned R4 today, we translated you to RDB. And so we have kind of a little cheat sheet that we use to kind of translate existing zoning to new zoning. And then as far as it goes with the land use plan, So if Richmond 300 called for a greater intensity than the existing zoning district that was on the ground, then we kind of took the least intense district from the corresponding land use. So for example, if Richmond 300 suggested the future land use for an area was to be neighborhood mixed use, and the underlying zoning district didn't accommodate that type of intensity currently, then we changed the zoning to something like RAA, for example, in neighborhood mixed use. So that was kind of our starting point. So there were instances in Richmond 300, because of how broad Richmond 300 was in a sense, there were instances where Richmond 300 called for less intensity. So where an existing district was more intense, because sometimes the land use categories went over commercial areas, small commercial areas, then the existing zone district was converted to the closest new district. So for example, we might have taken UB1 and translated that to MX4, even though it might have been MX3 now, even though it might have been in neighborhood mixed use, for example. And so we just want to make sure we acknowledge the Richmond 300 nodes. So we wanted to make sure proposed zoning districts aligned with the goals of each node. There are a number of nodes on the map, and the nodes are very different. Some of them called for upzoning, some of them didn't. So we have, to the best of our ability, translated what was suggested in the plan. So we previously talked to you about upzoning properties that fronted major residential and major mixed-use streets in the plan. So we heard what you said, and we've gone back and modified that approach. So currently, as proposed, we're not upzoning everything that's along a major residential or a major mixed-use street. We've now added the enhanced transit corridors as identified in the plan. So if you're on a major residential street or a major mixed-use street and an enhanced transit corridor, then we're upzoning you. So there's been a significant change in how much upzoning is accommodated based on the street types in Richmond 300. And then finally, the CG commercial general district was applied along major outlying corridors, but not to nodes or areas within a quarter mile of a planned BRT stop. So with that, I'm just going to pass it over quickly to Jonathan, who's going to just walk you through a map really, and just to see how some of those key principles applied out on a kind of a real map. Makes a little bit more sense that way.
Yeah, so it's easier I'm a visual person. I like looking at the maps as we talk about these rules. So an aerial image was always a reference. And then overlaying the existing zoning district along this whole street corridor, you can see that the properties fronting Whole Street are the B3 zone. And then on both sides of that are R5 with a couple of little pockets of B1, R02, or R6. So keeping that as a reference, then laying the Richmond 300 map over the same area, you see that the land use categories don't perfectly follow the existing zoning. And so basically taking all of these layers and the rules that Colin just mentioned, it would produce this proposed zoning. So particularly for the case where, I'm going to go back a second, where this B1 is called out as just a couple of small commercial areas within the residential neighborhood, that was not identified on the Richmond 300, but it pulled through into the proposed zoning, especially being on an enhanced transit corridor here. So that's just one example of these rules applied to one neighborhood. Enough? Yeah. Okay.
And so we just wanted to leave you with a few questions to think about. So we're going to address your mapping comments or hear your mapping comments during the next ZAC meeting. So how do you feel about the approach to upzoning or lack thereof along major corridors? Do you agree with the way that CG is being mapped? Are there any zoning district adjacencies that you find jarring? Are there places where you don't think the proposed mapping adequately matches the intent of Richmond 300? So those are just a few questions to get you started. And we look forward to hearing your comments at the next meeting in June. And we'll be working in the background with Marianne here today and tomorrow to get you guys a map to look at and comment on. Thanks.
This is Jennifer. I just had a quick clarification. Did you say that you applied an upzoning for, like, on your draft map here with the full street that's on a enhanced transit corridor? It's currently zoned B3, which allow 3 stories, but you've got it at MX3. Is that MX just what you're considering the upzoning, just so we can understand for June?
In this case, the MX3 was not upzoned beyond B3 or B1, sorry. But right next to those, you see there's areas of RAB along the corridor. The RAB is an upzone of the residential properties along that enhanced transit corridor.
Interesting. So you upzoned the residential, but not the commercial.
Yes. Partly because the inherent nature of MX3 is already, the way MX3 is written is already a little bit more intense than the way B1 is currently written.
It's B3 though.
Are you talking about this parcel, the B1?
They're all B3 on Hull Street.
Oh, on Whole Street. Oh, yeah, B3. Okay. So yeah, B3 includes some general commercial areas.
B3
Yeah,
okay.
so
I needed a clarification. Sorry.
And there might be some issues to staff only received this not too long ago and have been trying to give some comments to the consultants. So some of them, they just incorporated our comments or that comment about the MX3. You might run into things like you were talking about.
Yeah, that seems like a downzoning on that.
All right, Philip, we got the last one.
Okay, a question along with Philip Hart, along this line. A couple of presentations ago, we were talking about major streets and the densification along major streets. And there was one chart where what was being proposed at that meeting was upzoning 2 notches. I'll use the word not. And a number of us meet saying, let's go to 1. Where are we on that issue? Are you upzoning 2 or are you upzoning 1 in this current proposal? You said you're going to the less intense, so that sounds like 1 step, not 2 that was being talked about a couple of months ago. Is that it? Is that right?
yeah, so instead of thinking of it as specific notches of upzoning, we changed the approach to where, because what you would be talking about would be these major corridors that are not on the enhanced transit. That's where we had been upzoning 2 notches previously, and we are not doing that anymore. So the upzoning is only along the enhanced transit corridors.
Got it. Thank you.
And it does kind of affect our methodology of upzoning. Within the enhanced transit corridor that has just that is designated just a major residential street, it's only 1 notch. But if it's also a major mixed use street, then it's 2 notches.
On enhanced transit.
I mean, I can give you too much detail now, which I'm in danger of doing. So Colin, cut me off whenever.
We're gonna get a chance to see the maps and review and digest them a little bit before the June meeting. I know I said Philip was last, Dave, very brief, and then Damien, and then we're gonna close it up so we can.
Very brief. I'm concerned about the MX3 not being an MX4. I'm concerned about the 35-foot height limit. I think what we're talking about is lowering things. People think it's going to be better. I'm concerned that the quality of the product that we're going to get is not going to be as good. That's from an architectural standpoint, that's from a design standpoint, and that's from a vertical transportation issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, agreed on, I don't know where this came from, the MX4 going down to MX3. I think we should be consistent between RX and MX. If either of them is going to be lowered, it should be the RX. I don't think we support that, but that would be consistent with other comments that were made. Why MX would be lower than RX, I don't understand that at all. And I'm concerned about the methodology doesn't seem to be resulting in enough upzoning if this intersection of two of our major north-south corridors only allows, 3-story buildings. That seems to be very contrary to my understanding of where all this was supposed to be going.
No, that's a good point. Colin, did you capture that?
Yes.
So I think between now and the next meeting, when we get the maps, spend some time with the maps. You already have some questions here for June to be thinking about. I think you definitely need more about some of the upzoning on the major corridors, Damien and Dave and others have pointed out. Marianne will get us the maps, a reminder of the dates and timeline. Is there anything else that we need from the group need from staff between now and June? Colin, any parting words from you guys?
No, thank you for the great conversation and looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say in June.
Great. All right, with that, we'll adjourn. Just move to our next meeting is June 11th, and here is 1 p.m. Thank you.